What if the very thing you've been praying to disappear from your life, your greatest weakness, your constant struggle, isn't meant to be removed at all? What if instead it holds the key to unlocking a strength far greater than anything you could ever imagine? There was a man once, a giant of faith, who had such a weakness. He prayed, pleaded, and begged for it to go away. But what happened next wasn't what he expected. It changed everything about how he viewed suffering and transformed the way he understood God's power in his life. This is the story of Paul and the mystery of his thorn. Paul, one of the greatest apostles in Christian history, had seen it all. He had witnessed miracles, preached to nations, written letters that would shape the course of faith for centuries, and had a life-altering encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. But even for Paul, life wasn't easy. There was something he carried, something that tormented him deeply, referred to only as a thorn in the flesh. Paul doesn't explicitly say what this thorn was. Some believe it may have been a physical ailment. Others think it could have been a spiritual struggle or emotional pain. What we do know is that it was a source of constant frustration, a weakness that made him feel vulnerable and limited. Paul did what any believer would do. He prayed. Not just once, but 3 times he cried out to God to take this burden away. He pleaded for relief, for freedom, for strength to do more without the weight of this suffering. Surely, with all the good he was doing, God would remove this thorn, right? But God didn't. Instead of removing Paul's thorn, God spoke to him with these words, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. In that moment, Paul realized that God was not ignoring his prayers. He was answering them in a way that was far greater than Paul could have imagined. God didn't need Paul to be perfect or strong in every way. Instead, it was precisely in Paul's weakness that God's power could shine most brightly. The thorn was not a sign of failure or abandonment. It was a reminder that God's grace was enough for Paul to carry out his mission, no matter the struggle. Paul's understanding shifted. No longer did he see his weakness as a hindrance. Instead, he embraced it. He realized that when he was weak, God's power took over. Paul famously declared, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians 12:9-10. This was the great revelation. God's strength doesn't show up when we're at our best. It shows up when we're at our lowest. It is in our vulnerability, our brokenness, our weakness, that his power finds its perfect home. Paul's thorn didn't go away, but he stopped seeing it as an obstacle. Instead, it became a gateway to experiencing God's presence in a way that might not have been possible otherwise. The more Paul relied on God's strength, the more God's power flowed through him, allowing him to do things beyond what human strength could achieve. The life-changing message. How often do we, like Paul, pray for our thorns to be removed? We feel weighed down by physical pain, emotional scars, fears, or weaknesses. We plead with God to take them away, thinking we'll be more effective, more whole, more useful to him without them. But what if those very weaknesses are the places where God wants to reveal his greatest strength? What if, in our vulnerability, we become the perfect vessels for his grace? God didn't promise us a life free of hardship, but he promised us something greater, his grace. He promised that his power would carry us through every trial, every struggle, and every weakness we face. Paul's story teaches us that we don't have to be strong to be used by God. We don't have to have it all together. In fact, it's in the cracks of our brokenness where God's light shines through the brightest. Our weaknesses, the thorns that we wish would disappear, are not signs of failure. They are opportunities for us to experience God's strength like never before. When we shift our perspective from asking, "Why, God?" to, "How can you show your power through this?" we open ourselves up to a life where God's strength is more real, more present, and more powerful than we ever thought possible. Paul's thorn was never about weakness. It was about power. And so is yours. The next time you feel crushed by a thorn in your life, remember these words. "My grace is sufficient for you, For my power is made perfect in weakness. Let that truth sink deep into your soul and watch how God transforms your weakness into his greatest display of strength.